Welcome to Totnes in Devon. My name's Rob Hopkins from Transition Town Totnes. Transition Town Totnes is the UK's first transition initiative, and it's very nearly celebrating its 5th birthday. And what Transition Town Totnes has been looking at since the beginning here has been the concept of resilience in the context of this place. What would it look like if this place were much more resilient as we enter increasingly uncertain times in terms of energy shocks, economic shocks? How can we make our food, our building materials, our local economy much more resilient, and in doing so actually make it a much more thriving, vibrant, skilled and resourceful place? One of the things we've done from quite early on has been to talk to the elders of this community who have a living memory of the last time this place had to do with less. So in this short film we'll be talking to 4 local elders for their recollections of that time, and then at the end of the film reflecting on what we can draw from that might help us to move forward from today.
I think there'll be shocks. I think there'll be lots of shocks, economic shocks. And within my living memory, there was a time when we were resilient back in the 50s and 60s and could absorb those shocks. The Second World War was a massive shock to the world, to Europe in particular, to this country in particular, an island that's surrounded by German U-boats with the threat of starvation, still managed to feed itself, and probably could have if it was completely cut off with difficulty, but it had that resilience. That resilience has now gone. We are now at the mercy of, we're held to ransom by oil. Switch off the oil, we will starve. There's no ifs, buts or maybes. It was a happy time. There were fewer distractions. You know, today the consumerist sort of lifestyle we live is very distracting. At the time it was slower, and what you did do, you could concentrate on, you could apply more time to. Television only had 2 channels. We listened to the radio a lot more, we read books a lot more, and sat in the garden and talked to each other. Yeah, I remember that, talking to each other. Nothing was thrown away, there was hardly any waste. It was unheard of to use plastic for plastic bags, that sort of thing. Food was, although not in short supply, it wasn't wasted. You know, what you didn't eat, you gave to the dog. The dog didn't have dog food, the dog had what we ate left over, if there was any. There were a lot of hungry dogs. The farmers used to bring their cattle in on a Tuesday, I think, to the cattle market at the top of the town. And that was riotous. The whole town filled with cattle trucks, mud, dung, straw. It was awash with animal waste. The pub stayed open all day, and by the end of the day it was awash with drunken farmers and farmhands, so it was colourful. I ended up working on the Totnes Times, which is the local weekly newspaper. At the time, being a white-collar worker was regarded as very uncool. It wasn't fashionable at all. And I happened to be the only applicant for the job, which is probably why I got it. And one of the coldest winters we had was in 1963. And it was cold for months, even here in the southwest. It was so cold it was indescribable. So you only heated one room and huddled round that one fire and maybe watched the television in that room. then ran for bed, and you'd keep warm with hot water bottles. You know, old men were expected to carry on until they were too ill to work anymore. But most of them weren't. And I'm working gradually. It's incremental. You can't make big changes, but I can make a start with myself and with some of the things that I do. The Transition Town Totnes initiatives have started to reinvent that community togetherness. It'll never be replicated as it was in the 50s and 60s, but it's better than what we had in perhaps, say, the 80s and 90s, when everybody was quite insular and wrapped up in their own lives and their own little business, and they didn't need anybody. I think in the future we will need each other, and practicing that need and getting together now is not a bad thing. I think now we have to perhaps appreciate the old days of not austerity, but appreciating our needs more than our wants.
The difference between then and now is that most people who owned the shops lived above them, whereas now they're empty above. And people liked their town, they enjoyed their town, they were proud of their town. Every morning you'd see people out cleaning the place in front of their shops. People were poor. We had people that came into school that worked on farms, that parents were farm labourers, and they were poor. I guess the people that had plenty of money possibly didn't go to school in Totnes. They'd possibly gone to private school. I'm not quite sure why we had a car, but my dad built a garage onto the side of the house. And we went out in this car, usually on a Sunday, maybe on a Saturday if we're going to visit some relations. But that's what everybody did. You didn't go to school in your car. My dad never went to work in his car. We were never picked up and taken in the car. That was to outings. Yeah, my dad, like all the other men, grew beans and peas and potatoes and onions and beetroot and tomatoes and lettuces, everything. And obviously if you ran out, then you'd get it at the nursery in town. We couldn't afford to go up to London. We couldn't afford to. Or you wouldn't have had, obviously if you'd gone to work at Painting a Torquay, you would have had to get the bus. But people did prefer to employ you if you lived locally. So if you couldn't get a job at Reeves's, you could get a job at the bacon factory. So there was always a job for somebody if you wanted to have a job. And of course, if your family and your father had worked there before, they'd take you on because your father was a good worker or your mother was a good worker, and they'd want to take you on, and they'd be happy to have you. At least when I was young, of course, the start of it all was the Elmhouse at Dartington Hall, but then it was them and us. We were Totnes and they were Dartington. But we used to get to go there once a year at Christmas, and they'd let us try out the music. We'd do the handbells, we'd see a show, they'd give us food, and it would be just great, just great. Again, we'd be on although we went to the school, we'd be on our own, we'd be trying all these new things. Yeah, it was great. We were all a community, and we were all together, and you knew everybody. You could walk up the street and you knew everybody, and then all of a sudden there were other people and we didn't know who they were. They sort of came from what we called outside, and obviously bought the houses that we couldn't afford to buy. And from knowing everybody, we came to be half of Totnes and half of others. But I'm not sure how that came about. It just sort of happened. We somehow, in the past, lost it. We took our eye off the ball, I think, somehow. And yeah, but I think we're coming back. I think we are very community-based. We're very friendly people. We like to be part of something. And I think if we can get that back, and I think the new people that are coming into Totnes do like the idea of that. They do like to be part of a community, and we do like to be part of a community, and I think that's a good bit.
I was born in 1939, just prior to the Second World War, and of course then during the war years, where we were growing, or I've heard my mother and father say over a period of time, that all the flowers that they used to grow in pot plants, that all had to be given up. They had to produce food for the war effort. Now, in those days, everything was grown on this plot of land. They had a few greenhouses. They had a greenhouse up against the wall, which is part of it is still remaining behind me. It's been rebuilt a couple of times, and that is where they used to grow all the apricots, peaches and grapes as rather exotic fruit. We would start, sometimes 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, and would not finish until 10, 11 o'clock at night. We had to plant by hand, we had to pick by hand, and we had to grade tomatoes by hand. Nowadays, mechanisation has taken over. The population of the town wasn't as great as it is today. Plus, you had a lot of independent traders going down through the main street. We still have got independent butchers at the bottom of the town. You have a greengrocer or 2 greengrocers at the bottom of the town. You have a plant supplier there next to the King Bill pub. But a lot of the other shops have gradually disappeared. There was shortages of a lot of things compared to what you have today. I don't miss that. I suppose I was fortunate that I worked with my parents in that particular trade. But everybody seemed to be happier. They took a little bit of time to speak to everybody, whereas now the pressure of society is such that you've got to dash out, do the things that you want to do, and get back. Because there is so many things that you want to try and get done. They haven't got the time to go to individual shops now. They go in, they pick up their trolley, up and down the aisle, they're picking off the things that they want, whereas before you perhaps would have to go into a shop, have to wait while the customer in front of you was being dealt with, and then it was your turn to order what you wanted or select what you wanted. Plus the fact is, with the supermarkets coming into Totnes, you're pulling or bringing in more people from the country area, whereas before, back in the 60s, early 70s, not everyone had vehicles, their own transportation. They had to rely on buses to come in. Buses have been gradually withdrawn from a lot of areas, and people have got their own means of transportation. So, yes, I suppose, sorry to see an area of land go and be built on, which could have been still producing food for the particular area, but the demand was such, and the demand is such by the supermarket. They require high quality produce, and I think in some respects there is a lot of produce that could be sold, could be used, which is thrown away. I think people have got, or our customers today have got a vast range of food that I wonder whether they appreciate it, because there is a tremendous amount of waste in this country.
was born in Bilbao, and there was a civil war that started in 1936, and we were all right until Franco's troops started to come, and some very nice English people organized an expedition of Basque children to come to this country in 1937 during the Civil War. There's still, 1 year of civil war in Spain. In 1942, Dr. Camps, a biologist, a Spanish biologist with a wonderful, wonderful career, was teaching in Dartington. She was in charge of the Basque children as well, and so she had met us and thought that we would do very, very well in Dartington. So we did the Frebel course, the Frebel diploma, a 3-year one in Dartington, and took the finals in Exeter University. Carito began to teach, Carito is my sister, by the way, in the junior school, and I started to teach in the middle school. I have this rather good, I think, photograph of her in her classroom, and I think this symbolizes the attitude of teachers and towards pupils, the empathy, the sympathy, the wonderful thing of being together and working together and studying together. I think it says everything about the school. It's not good having a lot of freedom and not knowing what it is all about. You have to know the environment and to make proper choices. Ignorance is a great enemy of everything. Pupils didn't become priests or army people. No, they became artists or I don't know, doctors, anything except priests and the army, because we believed in cooperation in a big way. Dorothy and Leonard created Dartington and really gave it a fantastic, phenomenal start because of the people they were. And Dorothy was a wonderful speaker too, and she was a good actress. And Leonard was such a practical man, and if you didn't like trees, he made you love them. And they were thought of as part of a very special class of people with lots of money, but wanting to do good things, which they managed to do. People from educated at Dartington and Vauxhall are quite different still to most people like Ethan, people so they are more open, more interested in everything that goes on, more fun in many ways. They have a more intense life in many ways, and more tolerant of everything, so that they can look at things without being horrified or anything like that. They can take it in, what you are saying. They can listen. They are good listeners. If you have tasted freedom, you can't ever forget about it. And this is the same. If you have experienced how nice it is, cooperative and to talk and to do, then you go on with that. Because it was a good experience, and you go on with it. You go on developing it forever. The good things you have experienced are very, very important for you to be an optimist, because you know that they exist. When terrible things happen, I think, there was also Dartington. These things exist. When they tell me, well, it's always the same, the world is like this, is blah, 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 no good. I can't say that. I have tasted a little bit of sense, even in the Spanish Republic, and in Dartington a lot, And I know that it's possible to live with cooperation and to think it is good. It is a good way of doing things.
Put that in your soul. Go and put it in your soul.
So the purpose of this film hasn't been to idealise the past or to paint some romantic, rosy picture of it, but it's also about trying to reclaim something from it as well. We have a tendency in our culture to just dismiss everything that went before us as being rubbish and worthless, and everything that we do today as being so much better. In Transition Town Totnes, we really focus on this notion of localisation as economic development. That putting this economy back together again so that it meets more of its own needs could be the potential for an economic and social and cultural renaissance for this place.